welcome back to the Prepared Mind channel. I am John. I am the host, and we are here with Jolene, who likes to work in the background, and then, of course, Chris P. Bacon. He's back again to discuss what the hell is going on and what we should be thinking about. We're going to spitball a few ideas back and forth and talk about the need to prepare, because in my opinion, the need is becoming more and more apparent. Last night, or rather Saturday night, I decided to take a little road trip and went to a watering hole about 4 hours north of Sacramento. So that should really make it easy to find where I was at. And I was having a scotch, and a gentleman walked around from the other end of the bar, and he says, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "No." I said, "You look familiar." And he goes, "Oh, well, we met in Sacramento at a function about 10 years ago." And that started off a conversation, right? He's a fraternal brother, a United States Marine. And so we just started chit-chatting and catching up. I hadn't seen him in a long time. And like I said, I barely recognized him. And he said, "Well, I put on some pounds, you know." And we started talking, and he is still into real estate. And I said, "Well, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm still buying some houses for rentals, and then I'm doing some flipping of them." And I tried talking to him and saying, "Have you examined what's happening in real estate?" And he said, "No, I don't see any problems." He says, "I'm very, very careful, selective about what I buy." And I thought, that's a good thing for one. You know, I don't wish ill on anybody, especially, a friend. But, you know, I thought, is that going to be good enough? You know, being very selective, is that realistic when we approach this real estate market? It appears to have topped, and then we're starting to curl over in some areas. Not all, but some. And if I remember 2008, 2009, it didn't take long for people to discover they were in big, big trouble in real estate. And I think what has happened is people started doing the same thing they did last time, and that's using their real estate as essentially a checkbook or a credit card, using the equity from inflated values to buy goods, to buy cars, to go on vacations, to supplement their income. And here we are now, this day and age, you know, this specific, very narrow band that we're in, it's looking shaky to me. So he wouldn't listen. And the other day, I think I said, for those who are awake or will be awakened, they're awake already. And the rest are going to have to wait until shit hits the fan. And then they're going to wake up to basically a nightmare. And while I was talking to this gentleman, his wife came over. I glanced up at one of the TVs, and it was after the Cowboys game, which is what I went to go watch. Cowboys, Rams won. And anyways, there was a news article that SpaceX, which is Tesla's space division, trying to do civilian space, they're going to lay off 10% of their employees. That's a big deal for a company that gets massive government contracts, right? They're heavily funded through public payroll or public monies. Even though they're a private corporation, they get grant money, they get a lot. So very fascinating to see that at a time when I was talking about real estate. And anyways, that's what I wanted to start this talk out with, Chris, was real estate. It seems like it's topped out. I'm seeing more articles from England, from Australia, from Canada especially, and then the United States. From your perspective, do you think that people should be looking at real estate at this time as a safe haven? Or could they get themselves in trouble?
I think real assets are incredibly important for the times coming up. And I think, like you said, it depends on the market that you're in and the demographic that you're buying to rent to. In my perspective is that, and it's in the news, this is a top-down real estate crash already in motion. High-end units in major cities on the West Coast and East Coast are suffering, and I got to believe that there's a lot here in Chicago as well at that very high end. Builders have not been able to, with all the regulations and costs of development and all the other regulatory overlays, the only thing they can have been able to build really a lot of over the past 8 years has been the high end. And now there's a glut of it. So if your friend you talked to at the bar was buying brand new, fresh, high end stuff, I think I would be more concerned. I think that there's a good case for buying up any single family homes you can find, smaller ones. I don't know where he's finding them because there's been a battle for them and the prices have gone up tremendously. So, yeah, I mean, that's a tricky business to be in. And when you talked about, you mentioned they're using this cheap money to buy these homes at inflated prices just before a good chance of them going down. This is the same thing that companies have been doing with the cheap money. And what's even more sad than that, I can't imagine how a shareholder must feel when they find out that Apple at the top did a huge stock buyback with this cheap money, then Apple drops 30%. So they just basically took this money they borrowed, blew it out of a cannon, but they still have to service that debt. And it's the same kind of thing in real estate. I hear friends around here fighting over houses and cheering, I beat these other bidders. I got the deal. And they're looking at these cheap rates and they want to get the house. Why not? It's cheap rates. But they just negotiated for a price probably 20 or 30% higher than what they will be able to sell it for. If the numbers work out and they can rent it, then I think you have to look at the individual market, like you said, and determine how stable the job market is in that area. And yes, definitely have some real estate, anything solid and tangible that you can get a hold of. I'm all for.
Yeah, my friend said that most of his properties he has very high equity in, which is good. So he won't be upside down. But where I wanted to steer this more into the prepping, economic slowdown, shit it's the fan worries is if you're the owner of real estate and you're renting it, what happens when your renter who works for Tesla or for Apple or for Google gets laid off? How can they pay your rent? Now that as a property owner, which I used to be and used to develop property and build houses, all of that debt, it falls back in your lap and you can lose that house. Here in California, it's very difficult to get renters out. I'm sure it's that way in a lot of larger metropolises. They have protections for renters. So you're going to be sitting on property that someone else is enjoying in a major economic issue or problem. And they're not going to be paying their rent and you're going to have to pay it. And where are you going to get the money? If they're out of work, you may be seeing loss of wages. This is the economic trouble I think a lot of people aren't paying any attention to. And it's just real estate alone. This idea that just housing, because it's such a big part of our our gross income, Chris, you're paying 25 up 50% towards your mortgage or towards your rent. I know a lot of people that pay these high percentages of their income, and if they take a pay cut or something else happens, they can't afford to pay for their rent. And we have that robbing Peter to pay Paul trickle down. Everyone gets screwed.
Yeah, not only that, if you're in the wrong position, I mean, I have some acquaintances that I know now that have a half a dozen or a dozen properties. And last time around, when the real estate market took a dive, the eviction process goes through a sheriff and constable system around here. They flatly came out and said, we will not remove anybody from their homes. Sorry.
Really?
Oh yeah. I can find the articles or the statements, but the Chicago Police Department and the Cook County Sheriff's Department would not participate even after the 90-day waiting period to remove people from foreclosed homes, or you have to go through the very same. We have very strong renters' rights policy here in Chicago, and I've been a long time renter in different high rises around, and the renter's rights agreement that you sign with your lease is actually stronger than the lease with the owner of the property.
Wow. Interesting. Well, to kind of go down a tangential look here, if you make a late payment on a credit card or a no payment or on an automobile, a lot of times the contract has written into it that you're going to pay a higher percentage rate. Like you get a great percentage rate for starting a loan or using the credit card. You make a mistake, there's a huge penalty and interest that can be added on. Now, I guess depending again on the jurisdiction you're in, as a homeowner with a mortgage and you're renting a house, once again, something crazy happens, that liability falls back on you if your renter isn't paying. But I'm expecting, this is what I'm anticipating, Chris, and why I wanted to discuss this with you, is I no longer have that type of liability personally. I have divested myself of real estate because I know what's coming again. Anyways, there's going to be people who can't pay their rent. And this is going to compound problems because they're not going to be able to make car payments. They're not going to be able to make their mortgage or rent payments. Oh, you sent something through there, Chris. And, the liability for them losing their job or not paying their bills, it's going to come and it's going to land back in the owners. And then they're not going to be able to make their payments if it becomes chronic. And so you can see how this snowball can roll.
Yeah,
and affect people who otherwise would be fine. I do see how if there's massive amounts of foreclosures, the banks won't kick people out. They won't be able to. The system won't be able to handle it, but it's going to cause nothing but mayhem.
well, sure. The investor owner is going to be on the hook for whatever escalation policy there is in the mortgage agreement, or
Right.
whatever. Yeah. And now I guess anecdotally, a lot of people who lost their homes in 2008 turned into renters. So maybe some of the people who get foreclosed or get kicked out of their house will have to go rent and take up some slack. I don't know. There just aren't very many single family good investable homes around Chicago, at least. And I think after 10 years of everybody, first of all, the banks letting investors cherry pick all the nice deals, and all the realtors then dive in and grab all the good ones.
Right.
I'd be extremely careful about what I selected to purchase, even if I was going to rent it out.
Right. Yeah. A few years back, I went and considered going back into buying the foreclosure market, and the banks wouldn't let anything loose. They would hold on to it, and the banks themselves in my area would rehabilitate the houses, upgrade them, new roofs, new paint, new carpet, make them all pretty shiny, and then put them on the market, and they would sell them. The time before that, back in the early 2000s, they would just everything would go to auction. They didn't want anything to do with it, but they lost their asses, the banks, so badly in the 08, 09 crash that they had to do this to cover themselves. And I expect we're going to see more of the same. People living in a house will go from being an owner to a renter, and the bank will probably take care of all the paperwork for them. They'll lose whatever equity they had, whatever down payment they had, and they'll end up being a renter to a bank. So it's reminiscent of the 1930s when there were massive foreclosures nationally, and banks got the farm and banks got the houses, and
Well,
what a mess.
you're bringing up a very relevant effect that has a number of different causes, and like you mentioned with Tesla laying off 10% of their staff, the auto business is clocking in worst sales since 2015. They're pulling back in Europe. At least let's see, Ford was pulling back in Europe. GM's pulling back here. Goldman Sachs came out and said that 2019 could see an 85% reduction in earnings. It's a Zero Hedge article on page 1. So what is likely to happen is we're going to see this great unemployment rate we've got start to tick up over the next few months. And unemployment exactly points to what are you going to do about paying for where you live. And the real estate market is the very quick to take the hit when jobs are displaced.
Right. Yeah. Well, you got to have a place to live, right? Food, water, shelter. That's one of those Maslowian needs, and we have to. That's where people have to put their money. And if there's not even money to put there, what does that say about the rest of our economy? Buying durable goods, buying luxury items, buying automobiles when you don't have to. Everything else, when real estate takes a shit, everything else takes a shit. And of course, there are huge consequences for that. Not only are there sales down in auto, but the tax rolls, the government taking money, taxes, that I believe is really hurting the federal government. They get 25% of their tax from
25% comes from
capital gains.
Capital gains, right?
Right. So if we're not seeing capital gains, sales of houses and sales of equities, stocks in the stock market, if people aren't selling for a profit, the government's not getting, they're not getting their money, you know.
Right.
They're going to be upset.
You know what surprised me? I saw an article about New York real estate. Actually, it was a TV piece on Bloomberg this morning. Because of all the cranes in the air and the overbuilding in Manhattan, and they're all the high end. There's nothing even close to low end in Manhattan. But they were saying not only are they slashing prices on these $1 million plus homes, but they also brought out that in order not to spoil the market for the new ones, they had still been holding some back from buyers from the last crash. So now those got to come on, and it looks like a rush to market in New York. Get your stuff out there quick, get it out. You know, it's all going to hit the market very quickly. And in the midst of de Blasio declaring free health care for all, that didn't cost anything, does it? Nobody's going to pay any more taxes for that. There's going to be a huge flight from the very area where they need to unload all these homes.
Right. Well, normally I'm going to switch gears on you. It's a great point. And yeah, Manhattan, they got big problems there, do they not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So switching gears, we're talking about lower employment, lower housing values, the housing market kind of looking rocky, the auto market looking rocky. Not a whole lot as far as I'm concerned since we tripped over into 2019. I haven't seen any good news. The only good news we've heard is, well, maybe the president and the Democrats will clear up the government shutdown. And maybe Trump will come to a trade deal with China, but that doesn't produce income. It doesn't produce wealth. So we can do anything with that trade agreement. What good does a trade agreement do if you don't have the capital to buy and sell in trade?
Yeah, that's the market's gonna have a reflexive knee jerk when that's solved. But as always, the government cannot create demand.
Right, correct. Yeah, all they can do is create what? Currency.
They can create
Paper.
currency, and they can create a good or bad business environment for corporations to operate within. So that's about all they can do. They cannot create demand, and there's a huge shift in consumerism in our country now, where people just are not throwing away for the new version anymore.
Right. Yeah, they've had enough. So looking at the government shutdown, Chris, it seems to me that a lot more employees than suspected are finding out that they didn't get a paycheck. I don't have a comprehensive list of agencies that are considered non-essential, but it seems to be more than was originally anticipated. This is going to have an impact. I'm hearing more complaints now. The IRS took my quarterly that I mailed in, and they cashed that in a hurry. But the return they owe me on another one has not found its way back to me. So they've got accounts payable or accounts receivable.
Look at it this way: you close down every national park in the country, and think about all the hotels and attractions and communities that whole communities that depend on that
Tourism.
national park attraction traffic. So yeah, it's not just them.
There's a huge trickle down effect from this, and it's fast. It's instant. It's kind of like France. They've got their yellow vest protest. They threatened to do a bank run. I haven't heard if it's been successful or not, and I guess we wouldn't hear till a weekday anyways. But France, they rely on tourism massively, and all they're doing is scaring away tourists. So they've got the same problem over there, or the same results, different problem. Over here, we've got government shutdown. It's starting to trickle down. We're starting to feel it.
No, I feel horrible for the government employees that are not getting their checks. That's devastating, but they will be paid when they come back. That pay will be made up for, but all the other people that lost money because of all the shutdowns, all the ancillary businesses, restaurants, transportation, think of all the fuel oil tax that was not spent because people didn't commute to work. Nobody else getting that money back. That's already that ship's left.
Right. All the bars that were didn't get, restaurants and bars. That's big money.
Right.
You know, if you remember a couple years ago, it was, hey, if you need a second job, go be a bartender, go be a waiter. That's what people were doing to supplement their income. And now, toast. You know, those jobs just aren't available. Yeah, and they're drying up.
I can easily see the point where someone made, I don't know who, that the losses from the government shutdown easily are approaching the $5.9 billion that he asked for the wall.
Right. But don't tell Nancy that, because she wouldn't agree with it. And Schumer would just call anyone a liar, you know, because their political agenda is more critical than fact.
Even though they supported strong border measures multiple times in the past. Right.
Right. Yeah. One of my favorite things is to point out the hypocrisy of the stupid. But I feel like I'm preaching to the choir today with you. Anyways, so we talked about people not being able to pay their mortgage or their car payment because of loss of job. These employees for the government, not only are they not spending out in the private sector, what about their rent or their mortgage? Are they going to have to pay penalties even though they get their checks back? Will their car or credit card payments go up significantly because they're going to have to pay penalties and maybe higher interest rates? You know, is it going to affect their monthly interest and their ability to do anything other than just pay their bills? So I see a compounding negative effect because of this. And they're saying no end in sight. You know, Pelosi and Schumer are not backing down. Trump's not backing down. It's almost like we got a battle of the New York attitudes going on.
Yeah, my thought is that, of course, I thought this last week too. I thought they would come together for some kind of an agreement, but I guess as it stands tonight, both sides have their heels dug in.
Yeah, last week we had Trump come on. He did that prime time address to the nation, and he dared or chided or prompted those two to show up at the White House. They showed up, refused to even negotiate, and I think Trump and the Republicans did a good job of showing the Democrats as being the more obstinate, the more unwilling to work with the other side. And so they got the political points, but at what cost? Right? At what cost? And I believe that the left, the radical left, the socialist, Marxist, communist thinking left, and there's no doubt in my mind that those are the thoughts they have in their heads with free health care. I mean, that is a massive plank in the whole let's go that way with Marxism. Anyways, they have to cater to that radical wing of the Democrats, and so Nancy and I think Chuck are having to satisfy that to keep their seats and keep
I
their power.
I think that I think they're making a huge mistake because I recognize that there's far left and there's far right, but I think it's a bad strategy to present the entire Democratic Party as far as Marxist socialists. I don't. I think they're shooting themselves in the foot. I think they're doing damage control on statements made by some of their more vocal and inexperienced senators. And certainly last week it was. If it wasn't so sad, it was funny to see all the memes and jokes about uh, Nancy and Chuck, all the different portrayals of their uh, morbid looking faces staring into the camera.
Yeah,
Just was like surreal.
yeah, that was incredible that the mainstream media was lampooning them as well as all of the kids out there with their meme generators. It was incredible. Yeah, they're making themselves look like fools, and but the shooting. Who are they shooting in the foot, Chris? They're shooting themselves, and they're shooting all of America. I mean, yeah, I just see this as a problem, and so I'm going to ask a question here in a few more minutes about why they're doing that. But before we get there, I want to talk about EBT and the SNAP program, which is the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. EBT is basically welfare credit cards. We heard last week that there's a few rejections, a few stores or a few chains that weren't taking EBT cards. Have you heard any news over the weekend that that's progressing and getting worse, or is it still the same?
I haven't, but I think it's one of these classic cases of unintended consequences, because even though the EBT money is still there until March, I think they're out of money in March. I think the big boo boo was that the agencies that process the payments are not home right now. That's what I'm guessing, is that there's a problem with the grocery stores getting reimbursed. So and the only thing I can think of is, hey, government shutdown. But that was the reason why they were turning some EBT cards down, because they couldn't get paid.
Yeah, the cards have money on them, but the stores can't get reimbursed because there's a non-essential employee somewhere who's not doing their job, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So that
that's what I'm guessing it is. I haven't heard any more blow up about it. I think everyone should be alarmed about that, and what's coming next week for all the federal shutdown employees. If they're like the rest of America and only has $400 in their checking account, uh, things could get crazy like within days.
right? Yeah, it's something definitely to keep an eye out. I know that looting and flash mobs and protests with today's technology, with the social media contact, they can erupt near instantly, it seems. And so I think we need to be very aware of the neighborhoods we're in or traveling through or recreating in as we go through this, because it could just be on the announcement from the president or an announcement from Nancy Pelosi or an announcement from someone like Maxine Waters, who's the mere sight of her face is inflammatory. You know,
Right.
she causes problems just stepping out into the public and flapping her gums. And that could incite people to start behaving very, very poorly. The
Yeah.
lack of respect. Yeah,
Anybody traveling to major metropolitan areas should probably keep their head on a swivel for the news.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a good idea. Yeah, the level of respect that the national politicians have for the president. It's not so much that they need to respect Mr. Trump, but they need to respect the office. And they're not. We've lost that. We've stepped down another level into unethical, immoral, decadent behavior at the highest levels. And so if we see that type of behavior and thinking and talking from who are presumably the smartest and most qualified of us, what do we expect from the people at the bottom of the barrel, Chris? The
Right,
people on
right.
the street, the people in the zoo.
This Michigan senator that called the Trump an MFer. I mean, that can you imagine 4 years ago anybody saying something like that about Obama, and what, how they would be immediately removed, reprimanded, maybe even prosecuted. What they're doing is they're normalizing horrible behavior,
Right.
with the underlying arrogant presumption that they're right about everything.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Well done, Chris. There is the presumption that only they are right. And I think that attitude is going to be carried over when we start seeing hot spots of bad behavior in the inner cities, in suburbs, in areas that are affected most egregiously by what's coming. I don't see this slowing down. I don't expect it to get better. And I'm not going to call this a conspiracy theory, but it almost feels like what Trump and Pelosi are doing is intentional, and Schumer and others. It's almost like they're intentionally fighting with each other. I mean, I don't have any real evidence other than, don't they see what is happening? Don't they see the consequences of shooting themselves in the feet? They're shooting everyone else in the feet. We're not going to be able to carry our own weight because we've all got our feet blown off. So, are
Well,
they intentionally creating partisan fighting, Chris?
yeah, I mean, a few years ago, if somebody told us that the president would be in a Twitter storm with a couple of crazy people calling him, MFer and all these. I mean, we would say, that's got to be like a new TV series. That you can't make this. Doesn't sound like reality. It might sound like an exciting series or something.
Right.
It almost does seem like they're doing it on purpose. If the plan is to reduce the confidence of intelligent people with their government, then they've done it, and
Right.
they've all done it with all the maniacal bickering back and forth. And I got to tell you, I think the something smells very fabricated about the U.S. Chinese trade deal to me. I can't put my finger on it, but it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Economy is rolling along. Ultra sensitive Trump, who's very sensitive to fluctuations in the market, he's always in there trying to talk it up. Why would he all of a sudden launch an aggressive trade war with China, and then all the back and forth and flip flopping and yes, we have an agreement, no, we don't. It looks like kabuki theater to me. that whole thing, and the government shutdown thing is also, he's really throwing gas on the fire there.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the tactic, but I don't understand the strategy.
Right. Well, why don't we stop right there, Chris, and say, let's see what this week produces. And we'll call this a wrap for now, but a lot of question marks for me about what the fuck they're doing, right? And why they're doing it, and why does it look almost and smell and feel and have this texture of fabricated problems?
Yeah.
And how can they not see the problems in housing and problems in automotive and problems in retail? Sears is closing, right? And it almost, that has no effect on the market negative the last week or so, because Trump came in there and they blew a bunch of cash into it. As far as I'm concerned, they just monetized the market, right? There's going to be a consequence for that.
Yeah. So the two things I'm watching next week, there is a meeting with President Z next week, and right now it looks like the free fall made a U-turn, right? And we're at a very we're at a critical point between support and resistance on some major volume in the past. So we're going to find out if we're going to take another U-turn down or if this is a real U-turn where we just keep heading up with more, uh, more happy days and buy the dip.
If I were to make a call, last week we saw the gains get less and less per day, and we finally finished with the negative day. This week, I say the stock market goes negative, and we won't see that rise in the Dow until they start just throwing the new QE at it. Tons of cash, helicopter money to reinflate it to give people a sense, and then right following on that seals will be inflation. That could be a month away or 2 months or 3 months. Who knows? But this coming week, I think it's going to take a crap.
All right.
We got our predictions there, Chris.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm gonna claim total ignorance because I can't tell what's going on right now. But we have one vote for crap, and well, I'm good with that. That's a great place to stop.
Yeah, very good, Chris. Thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. I enjoy having you on here once a week and discussing all of these topics and how they should be lending themselves. Everyone's, if you're here, you're paying attention. You're a prepper, and we're seeing heavy signs. So thanks again, Chris.
Thank you. It was fun.